Welcome to Fearlessly Made You. I am your host, Kristietobias. Joining me today are guests just striving to dominate in their personal and professional lives while answering the question, what does it mean to be fearlessly made? On this episode of Fearlessly Made You, I am so excited, honored, and blessed to have Dr. Cedric Alexander with us. Dr. Cedric and I were introduced by a mutual colleague here in the Pensacola area. And one of the things that I noticed immediately about Dr. Cedric was just his ability to really be a great leader, role model, and just a mentor for this community. So Dr. Cedric, so excited to have you here today.
Well, thank you for having me. It's delighted to be here with you all. So, just a little bit about myself. I grew up here in Pensacola, really a kind of quiet, shy kid in the neighborhood, but graduated from high school from Booker T. Washington, went on to FAMU to school, and spent first 14 years of my professional life as a police officer in Tallahassee, Orlando, and Miami. Then decided to go back to school in 92, did a doctorate degree in clinical psych, practiced for about 5 years. And at that time, I was received a postdoc fellowship to the University of Rochester in Rochester, New York, and worked at the hospital in the medical center training as a psychologist and doing some teaching and clinical work as well. And Mayor and I became friends. They were having a number of issues around police and community, much very similar to what we're hearing about today. And he wanted to recruit me to help him, both with my police background and also as a psychologist. And so for the next 4.5 years, I left the University Medical Center, went to the police department, and spent 4.5 years as assistant chief and subsequently chief for a short period of time, and went on to number of other jobs in the state of New York, and also was head of the Transportation Security Administration there in Dallas-Fort Worth at the airport, and decided I wanted chief again. Ended up chiefing in DeKalb County, Georgia, which is a large metropolitan county just adjacent there to Atlanta, and then got called back to Rochester to serve as deputy mayor for a couple of years with a friend of mine. And then after that, I decided that was enough, so I came back home here in Pensacola after over 40 years of public service, and now I'm here. So I do a lot of consulting currently. I'm very much involved in a lot of the conversation, discussion around reimagining policing in the country and reform, and how do we begin to define public safety all over again. And so that's the space I live in my consulting life. And so I read a lot about it, lecture a lot about it, write about it. So we're in a very, very challenging time, I think, in our country at this moment, but this is where we are. So the goal is going to be how do we move the country forward in light of all the issues that we're currently confronted with.
I am grateful to have you being someone who's so embedded in the work that needs to happen within our country right now, but also knowing that you're not just embedded, you've seen the transitions, the progress or lack of progress over the past 40 years. And so as you've thought about that, I think about when we think about the conversation around Fearlessly Made You, there's a lot of maybe you are the only one kind of pushing for some changes or progress or things like that. And it's why you've been called upon to such great work. Were there ever times for you where there may be, and for lack of a better word, there's maybe a fear of maybe not knowing how to make changes successful, or not knowing if people are going to be receptive to the things that you wanted to share or kind of push forward?
No, that doesn't bother me. Because I think what I'm doing, always have done, has been a higher calling at a spiritual level for me. And secondly, what I do is so like who I am. It's like being chief of police in 2 large cities, and for many folks, it's a stressful job. For me, it was never stressful. It may have stressful moments that you may contend with, but for me, it did not impinge upon me in a way that I don't want to do this, I hate this, or whatever the case may happen to be. It was always the challenge of, and in fact, every organization I've led, and I've led a number of large organizations, both at the local, state, and federal level. But each one of those agencies I've worked in, when I got there, were troubled in some form or fashion. And it was always my goal to go in and help change the culture, which is, to me, what makes the job really interesting, because culture is more than just writing new policy and telling people what to do, but it's really role modeling behaviors, is setting expectations and goals, is being supportive of people that work for you, with you, but it's also having the ability to make a decision to move people along who cannot be part of what needs to happen to make the organization better. Absolutely. So, no, I've never had a concern about failure. My concern was always about running out of time, in order to get the job done. But it was never about failure. Failure is not an option for me. As long as we have people who are, if I'm and everyone else around me in my space is working in a direction of trying to make some formative changes to a culture or environment, we can do it. But I also understand it's something I cannot do alone.
Absolutely.
But that has been most of my career, meeting those challenges at those levels, and so it's worked well for me. And we're still in the midst of it, even though I don't have a formal employer.
Right.
But where I am here again, I have at a national level is continuing to have the impact on social reform in our communities across this country, which is so important, and particularly as it relates to police and community.
Absolutely. And it's interesting. So for those of you, as you're watching or listening, one of the things that I'll share is one of the ways that Dr. Cedric and I got connected was because there's a lot of work that, to Dr. Cedric's point, I feel like I've been embedded in, period, throughout my career around cultural change, and especially when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so Dr. Cedric was recommended to me as someone who has been so deeply embedded in not just the dialogue, but the actions and the challenges that go with that. And so knowing that about you, and knowing that this is such it's who you are, like you said, and it's such an challenging and it requires a lot of focus in this area right now. It brings me to the question of thinking about how you, as the shy kid from Pensacola, was able to transition into this type of work and position that really requires you to kind of step into maybe some really difficult conversations that I don't know if that shy kid in Pensacola knew that he was going to be able to do at this stage in his life.
Well, certainly I started out being very shy. I still like to think in some ways that I am shy, but you're probably not going to note that from this interview or any other conversation, I may have with people. But in many ways, I still have a very quiet, subdued spirit, but I'm also very aggressive, and I'm very assertive, and I'm very direct. I'm very no nonsense, but I also consider myself as someone who is very fair. But to go from, the shy kid in the neighborhood to the national leader around police reform in this country is an evolution over time, over 40 years, a journey in which I could never written for myself. And that's why I always relate to the fact this is a much higher calling to me. But along each of our lives, we all hit certain milestones, right? And hopefully we learn something as we go along through life. And it builds us for the next thing, that builds us for the next thing, builds us for the next thing. So for me, looking back now, because when you're in the midst of it, you really can't see it. But as you look back, your vision becomes a lot clearer as to what your journey has been.
Mm-hmm.
But you have to always have an idea about what it is that you want to do. You got to have courage to take a leap.
Absolutely.
I did a Yale TED Talk at Yale University back in 2019, and the title of it was A Leap of Faith, and really having the ability to trust your instincts, whatever it is that you want to do, whatever goal you set for yourself. And to achieve that goal, you have to be focused and you have to be determined, and you never give up until you reach that particular milestone in your life, whatever that may have to be. For some people, it's finishing high school. For other folks, it's a job they always wanted. For other people, it's, it can be a variety of things, whatever your desire is in life. And mine was, when I started out, I really didn't know. I was just a street cop, right? But over time, as we grow, we pay attention, we mature, we move up the ranks of life, and we gain a little strength along the way. We build a little confidence along the way. We learn that our voice is important, so we make sure our voices are heard. And that's something I always tell women and people of color, is that when you're sitting at a table, don't just sit there, have a voice at the table, or get up and get out of the room, because that becomes important.
Absolutely.
In your mission in life, and you learn along the way, and people will learn from you because you bring something as a woman that I don't have as a man, right? And I think all of our voices have to be heard. It kind of goes back to, I think it's something I saw that you read, or something you had said once, and I believe that was you. If it wasn't, I'll give you credit for it.
I'll take it.
Diversity and equity are two different things.
Mm-hmm.
Diversity is having a diverse group of people in a room, but equity is making sure that their voices are heard and their ideas are shared and exercised. That's real diversity, not the window dressing stuff oftentimes we see that go on in a variety of different agencies, organizations in our communities, and we have to call that out, right? Yeah. But for me, the journey has always been about being focused, being determined about what you want to do. After 15 years in policing, I decided I didn't want to do it anymore. And I went back to grad school to do a doctorate degree that academically, quite frankly, when I first got there, I thought I was ill prepared for, because it was very challenging. Because I gave up everything to go back to school full time in classroom in Ohio. And, but you set your sights, you make up your mind, you be determined. And for me, having a sense of faith, right? And moving towards that goal. And God walked me, along that journey. But whatever people beliefs are, whatever gets them through the day, you take that and you let it drive you, because we can't achieve anything unless we can really visualize it, right? And as possible as it may sound or seem, it doesn't mean that we can't achieve any of the goals that we have, because people who have sit in these jobs of leadership, sit on these thrones, sit on a variety of different places, high in government, they're no different than you and I. Mm-hmm. They're no smarter, they're no faster. They're just determined. And those are people who decided what they wanted to do and they went after it. And they're just like you and I. They're just everyday people who make a commitment to whatever it is that we want to do, and we have to do the same thing. But we have so many people in our communities, across all these variety of different groups that represent a broad and diverse America. Mm-hmm. People who don't feel that they can achieve their goals. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But there's somebody who look like you, walk like you, talk like you, who wear their hair the same way you do, who put on their pants or their skirt the same way you do, they achieve those goals. You can too. But it's building a confidence in yourself a little bit along the way. And surrounding yourself with people.
Yes.
Who are going to be supportive of you and your mission.
Absolutely.
Right? Because that is cleverly important in order to be successful.
There's so much. I wish I could have you here for 3 hours. So there's so much to unpack from that, but I'm going to focus on a couple of key things that just so truly resonate, which, first of all, thank you for saying the conversation about if you're at the table, and especially as someone that is a person of color or a person who has not been represented, speak up. Because so often I have a lot of people, and I know you do too, who are like, wow, it's so amazing, like that you're stepping out. It's like, no, like it's our responsibility, because there's a pathway where other people, if they don't see you speaking up, they're not going to feel like they can speak up. So it's that, and like you, I've always felt that higher calling, because I know there are people who don't feel like they can step up and say things or live out their journey and their passion. And so I say that and connect to that because there are people that are tuned in and listening that are thinking to themselves, but I don't know how that works for me. And so my question to you, it's the conversation that we always wrap around, which is, what does it mean to be fearlessly made? But I almost pose it to you in a different way. So being fearlessly made is one part of it, but sharing that journey and cascading it to other people, serving as a mentor. As I shared with everyone, I already consider Dr. Cedric a mentor to me. But how are you continuing to kind of cascade that strength and that empowerment to others in the community so they can feel like they can also step up?
So I want to come back to that.
Okay.
But it reminds me of something here.
Sure.
Imagine close your eyes for a moment. Imagine having 3 doors in front of you. Door number 1, door number 2, door number 3. You feel the anxiety of you got to open up one of those doors and you don't know what's behind those doors, right? But there's a surprise back there of some sort.
Right.
But you don't know whether it's a fun surprise, a threatening force, or whatever. So you look at those 3 doors and you have to open one of them up. And you're afraid, you're frightened, you're reluctant. It creates a great deal of anxiety for people. Some people may become frozen, depressed. That plays itself out in a variety of different ways as they angst through which one of those doors they're going to open. And until you open that door, that's the state you're going to be in, right?
Absolutely.
Until you step out and turn that knob and trusting something greater than yourself, using deductive reasoning as to why you should pick door 1, 2, or 3. And as you ponder it, you think about it, but you got to make a decision about your life. And your life is behind one of those doors. So you open the door. And as soon as you do, there's something back there. When you open that door, the anxiety will abate. Because whether it's a brand new house or a monster, the anxiety will leave. Being anxious, being nervous about our steps and decisions we make in life is normal. Let me normalize that. But it's not until we open that door of life and we look to see what's behind it is that the anxiety will abate. It will leave. And because then you have to do something different at that point.
Absolutely.
Right? And But we have to challenge ourselves, and we have to have courage. And that's why I always say you have to have people around you who are encouraging you, to take a risk, to take a chance. And role modeling for others is probably one of the most important learning tools there is, right? So let's talk about police reform for a second. We talk about
Cedric, can I have you lean more toward
yeah, and let's talk about how policing in the country needs to change, right? And everyone is talking about this in some form or fashion. We all have a responsibility in whatever our fields are of endeavors may happen to be. Mine happen to be around this issue around policing in this country. Is that the most important thing I can do is role model behavior. Mm-hmm. If I'm a chief of police in any city, USA, and I come in and I want to effectively change that organization, I have to role model to people what it is that I want and what those expectations are. Absolutely. I can write new policy, I can move people around on different jobs and do all of those things. But what folks are looking for from leaders today, they're looking for leaders to lead. And most people in this country, and probably around the world, but let's talk about the United States. Most people in this country don't want to be leaders. People want to be led, and that's not a bad thing. They want to have a nice neighborhood. They want their kids to go to good schools. They want to have a good job. They want to be able to make a decent living. And they want to have elected officials who do their jobs to make sure that those things I've just stated, which is basic Maslow needs, are met. Mm-hmm. So people don't want to have to go work and do those things too, and lead. People want to be led. But we're at a place right now where people don't feel there's leadership anywhere. Whether you sit on the right side of the aisle or the left side of the aisle, we live in a country at this very moment that is very divided. And we're just as divided, we're more divided in our attitudes of each other by political party than we are by race. And both of those are wrong. So for a leader today, you have to be able to role model what it is that you want people to do that you're leading. Your voice, every time that you open your mouth, people feel a sense of confidence. They feel a sense of calm. They feel a sense of safety. They feel that someone is representing them in some capacity, whether it's elected or appointed. They're representing them in a way in which makes them feel safe within their communities. Their needs are being met. And so for me, the essence of leadership is always going to be around how I carry myself, how I think about things. When I'm sitting there at a table with a command staff of assistant chiefs and colonels and majors and captains and whatever, every cue, every word come out of my mouth, they cling to, just like you're clinging to every word that comes out of my mouth right now. It's in my body language, it's in my tone, it's in my tenor. It's in my attitude that I respond to when we're talking about certain subjects. Because people are reading those cues. Mm-hmm. That's where they're learning, consciously and unconsciously. That's where they see your expectations and what's important. Because one thing you cannot do with people, if you're disingenuous, people will read through it. They will see it. If you're a disingenuous leader, people will not follow you. People will not follow you. People will go along to get along, but it doesn't move the organization along. Yeah. Because at the core of all that, people want to survive, right? So they will do and go and do whatever the leaders say, let's do. But role modeling, I think, is one of the most important elements that we have that we don't even have to go to school for. We don't have to study for. It's just being a good, decent human being towards things that many times going to be different from what we may have grown up with and known. And it's not, it's no more than just being respectful of people or where they are, whatever their orientation may happen to be. It's being respectful of that, because there's so many voices out there that are so powerful, and some of the most powerful voices have been silenced because the leadership doesn't allow them to give them the cure for cancer. Because the cure for cancer is out there somewhere. The cure for worldwide peace is out there somewhere. But that voice somewhere has been silenced. And in that silence, we all suffer from it. But when you open up that table of diversity, I'm talking about real diversity. I ain't talking about this bull crap we do, window dressing diversity, but real diversity. There in that table will sit the next Microsoft. At that table will sit the next Google. You know, and technology will advance, science will advance, medicine will advance. Our social construct in this country will move forward, right? But we got to make sure as leaders, we allow people to have those voices, and we seek and we look for the best and the brightest people out there. Not just bright in terms of having a 4.0 average, but bright in the sense that they too themselves understand the strength and the essence of diversity and equity at that table of life, or at that table in business or industry or education or wherever, right? So I just think we find ourselves through our journey. And as we put one foot in front of the other, your journey will define itself as you go along, right? So if your goal is to reach the end of that wall right there, as you walk towards that wall, if that wall is your endpoint, what did I learn between here and that destination? Because the real, the learning, the change, the growth is in the journey, not that destination, as we've often heard, right? But it truly is in each step that we make, because each step we make, we become stronger, we become more confident, we had a new experience, we meet people along the way, and life pushes you to that destination. And whatever your destination may happen to be, when you turn around and you look back and you think back, wow, look at what I've done over the last 40 years, 20 years, 5 years, 6 months. Right. Because it's life is evolving every moment, every breath we take. We're constantly evolving. We're constantly learning. We're constantly changing. We're keeping ourselves open for things to learn from, even if those things contrast with what we grew up knowing. Right. Right. But it's to be able to listen and to be able to critically think about things that are in front of us. And that's an element oftentimes in education that is being missed. Absolutely. It's not what I need you to read and regurgitate back to me. I need you to read this and learn and think critically about what it is that you studied. Ask questions. I read an article last year before last, when I was traveling in 2019 in Harvard Business Review. And one thing this article stated that was so profound that I took away from it was, you don't always seek the answer, seek the question. And that question will lead to another question, which would lead to another question. You understand what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
It's not just what's the answer to this. It's what other questions can we draw from this process to advance our thinking? Because once we answer it, we feel that's it. Right. But let's critically examine the question, right? And then let's have a process around asking other questions. I'll give you a case in point. One of the most profound statements made in recent days was Senator Tim Scott, following the congressional address by President Biden. And he's made this statement: America is not racist. And people went bonkers around it, particularly people of color. It is a statement that requires a response. It is a statement that should raise further questions, right? As opposed to just saying, okay, he's right or she's wrong or whatever, because depending on where you are in this world, depending on how you have experienced this America, for some people, it could be seen as a racist nation. And to others, what are you talking about?
Right.
You follow what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
So we have to raise the question, or raise, in this case, the statement. If you examine that statement, everybody's experience is going to be different.
Right.
But whatever his experience and whatever Tim Scott's journey was, or whatever journey Kamala Harris' journey was, or Cedric Alexander, or kristietobias, we answered those questions based on our own journey.
Right.
And whether you agree with me or not, it was our journey. Right?
Absolutely. Well, and what you share is absolutely the foundational understanding of what it means to own what we call your fearlessly made you existence. It's the foundation behind the book that prompted the podcast, and that's prompted this dialogue and this conversation. And it's the foundation behind, as people are listening and watching, that conversation of, so how do I? This is how you do. You don't just allow what other people may be telling you can do to be your end all be all. It's the, well, let me question where I should actually be going, or let me see the role modeling that I'm seeing in other people who have stepped out into maybe a journey that looks a little uncertain, but it's something that's producing something much bigger than themselves, because it has to. And I think that's the beauty of our conversation today. I think it's a beautiful way for us to really bring ourselves together to understand that each of us do have a journey that we're the only ones that can live. And we have a responsibility to own that and live that, and be fearless in that, because if we don't, who's going to?
Right.
And if we don't ask the questions, who is going to?
Right.
So one final thing that I'll ask you, and it's something, so I typically talk about, as you know, wine culture is very important to me, but for you, I want to talk about something a little different, which is balance. And so with all of the work that's going on, with everything that you're so passionately focusing on and achieving, what is, and as we think about this, so thinking beyond just you, but we want to share with others, like, how do you find balance in your life, and what does balance look like for you? It's kind of my closing question for you is balance. How do you achieve that balance?
Yeah, so a balance is going to be different for different people.
Exactly.
Some people it's going to be 33% work, 33% play, 33% time to yourself with family or whatever, right? To someone else, it may be something else. For me, having been single pretty much all my adult life, I don't define balance that way. Balance for me is doing what I love to do best 90% of the time.
That's fair.
That's my balance. Having chiefed 2 major police departments in this country, having seen the city's worst days and best days, on its worst days, and I've seen some worst days in Atlanta, people come through my door with their hair on fire. And I can sit there and I could look at my Fitbit, and my heartbeat won't raise above 70 beats a second. The worse the situation, the more critical the situation, the better I am. But that's me.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yep.
Because my balance is different than the person's next to me. I work because that's what motivates me. And when I look back over the years, as a chief in particular in two departments, my balance.
Hold on, I can't even hear of that. I'm getting a rumble from that very extended thunder.
Yeah.
It's shaking outside, which is.
So my balance may be different from someone else's. And so that's, everyone has to respond to what they've learned
Absolutely.
in their own family of origins around balance, and then what you define as an adult as your balance. But for me, balance was being there 80-90% of the time.
And the authenticity and the transparency in that for you, I think,
Right.
is beautiful. And it allows other people to say, I have to look at where my balance is, because I think too many times we try and define it by someone else's
By somebody
guidelines.
else's standards.
Exactly. And that's just not how
Right.
it exists.
But now, certainly, if you got a wife and kids,
Maybe shift. Maybe not. That's not your balance.
But like I say, I don't have.
Right.
I haven't had a wife and small kids. My daughter's grown now. I was married when I was 21 and divorced before I was 25. So that happened very early in my life. Right. So I haven't remarried. I don't have small kids. But if you got a wife and a family and small kids and other responsibilities, your balance in your life may be very different than mine. When I eat, everybody eat. When I go on vacation, everybody goes on vacation, right?
Right.
So I don't have that. But for me, my happiness is being in those situations that are, as crazy as it may sound, sometimes that are most challenging.
Doesn't sound crazy. It sounds right. I think it sounds perfect.
It's right for me.
It is right for you. I think it's a perfect way for us to, first of all, thank you, Dr. Cedric, because it's a beautiful way for us to really define like what being fearless looks like for you and what that balance looks like for you. And I truly appreciate you spending the time with me and just talking through those conversations that help us grow as a person, but also help us understand that our journey is ours alone and we have to own that and challenge that. So thank you so much for joining us on Fearlessly Made You. And everyone, stay tuned for the next episode of Fearlessly Made You.